John, you're the only one on the agenda right now.
Yeah, I can talk about this. It was actually already technically approved, but we can always change it. It will be a simple flag tweak. So in the last call, I wasn't actually here, but I think people talked on my behalf. We talked about moving to the Rust TLS library. That PR was merged, but what still remains to be decided is what will be the default crypto provider we use in the default Istio builds, which could be Ring, which is kind of the rusty one that most of the Rust projects use by default. Could be Boring Crypto, which is what Envoy uses and has a FIPS mode. Or there could be others. I mean, there's also an AWS one that has a provider. Those are the only three I know that have providers now, but Rust TLS just added provider support very recently. So presumably there'll be OpenSSL, I don't know, whatever, probably a bunch of other ones. So we need to pick one for the default. Obviously, we can add options for others. We already have in the current build an option for these two, but that's a compile time thing. So we probably don't want to show multiple builds. So I have the current one that merged is using Ring because that's kind of what most people in Rust are using. We were previously using Boring though, so we should probably have a concrete decision.
Yeah. What is the FIPS status of Ring?
Ring is currently not FIPS certified. They have a dubious path to being FIPS certified. Where they're actually, I think it's a goal and they might have funding for it, but even they have to do the engineering work to make it so that they can get approved, and then they have to get it certified. So it's like a minimum 1.5 years if they did all the work already. So if you're doing FIPS, like you should, you shouldn't use Ring. Like the Boring, you would use Boring for FIPS, I think. So the question is, do we care to ship the default open source build as something that's using a FIPS compatible crypto module, basically?
I mean, I guess the way to phrase the question is there any reason to use anything other than a FIPS compatible module?
I mean, the FIPS modules don't necessarily provide more security or performance or anything like that, right? They just happen to be a build that they paid the government for 2.5 years ago.
Yep. So
is there much of a difference? Not now that we're using Rust TLS, which is where most of the code is. I briefly benchmarked them. They're about the same.
Right.
Whereas Rust TLS versus the entire Boring SSL stack with the TLS stack, that was actually a meaningful difference in both performance and possibly safety as well.
I mean, if there's, well, just focusing on the benchmarks for a second, are there actual meaningful benchmark differences for zTunnel?
I did not detect any in my testing, which was decent but not exhaustive, between Ring and Boring. The Rust TLS project has some tests with AWS's provider, which is in the process of certification. That's showed improvements, but I forget if I tested them. I either tested them and saw no difference, or I didn't test them. I forget. So,
Ian?
Yeah, just one note is that I think right now the Boring crypto provider is like a little bit dubious in terms of who's maintaining it. I'm sure that will get fixed. So maybe it's not even worth considering, but just wanted to mention.
Yeah, that's a good point. That is true. Which is basically just the shim between Rust TLS and the actual crypto. Go ahead, Lei.
Yes, for Ring, is it not FIPS certified? Sure, it's definitely not a FIPS certified, you mentioned, but is it FIPS compatible?
I mean, you can and we do configure it to use only the signatures and the ciphers and the algorithms and all the various things that is required for FIPS stuff. So that's fine. It's just doesn't have the rubber stamp from the government, basically.
So there is a huge difference between FIPS certified versus FIPS compatible. FIPS compatible meaning that you claim that your implementation complies with the FIPS requirement. It just doesn't go through a lab, right? There is a lab, for example, to certify that your binary meets all the FIPS requirements. That certification is per binary, and it takes, for example, half a year or a year. But I'm a little bit hesitant to use something that is not even FIPS compatible, because that looks bad. But FIPS, not FIPS certified, seems to be okay, because get each binary certified by a lab is is a tiresome process. Okay.
Well, I think that's the choice that we're making, right? We either use FIPS compatible configurations of Ring or FIPS certified Ring binding to boring crypto. If John's benchmarks are right and there's a marginal or non-existent performance difference between the FIPS and non-FIPS build, there doesn't seem much reason to ship anything other than the boring crypto build at the moment. Right, Ring just gives people flexibility to create other build types.
Yeah, the thing I was sorry.
Like, do we want to ship a choice to users? I guess is the question, right? We can create multiple bills, but like, how are we going to give them the choice?
The thing I was a bit worried about is like if we ship the boring one, then presumably it's so that we can say somewhere like, hey, we're using the FIPS certified crypto module, and people will like that. But we don't ship a FIPS certified crypto module for Envoy, which is a part of Istio, and same with the Istio control plane. There's vendors that do that, and so having this pluggable module makes it much easier for a vendor to go do that. But it's not like something the Istio project provides, so it feels kind of like maybe even misleading to users. Or maybe not, but we probably shouldn't go plaster on the banner. It's FIPS certified, just install and you're good to go, right? We don't have to. Yeah.
If we had a FIPS certified module by default, I don't understand what the motivation for moving away from that would be. It's not clear to me what the advantage is. Not that we should necessarily, I agree with you, John, not that we should be advertising everywhere, hey, Istio is completely FIPS compliant or anything else, but it just seems like a step backwards if we had one of our TLS providers FIPS certified, and then we're moving backwards. There ought to be some sort of advantage for that change.
Yeah, there's a few benefits, but I will say that they're fairly marginal. Like, it's more compatible with different platforms. The build system's a lot easier. We don't have to use this shim that has questionable stability, though we'll probably go improve that stability of that for other reasons anyways. I agree. It's a bit marginal.
Having tried to build on ARM a year ago, I can relate to the build environment improvements being valuable, though. I see that.
Keith?
Yeah, one of the things that I think is worth mentioning, not a decision maker or breaker, but boring SSL, like boring crypto, is not the only FIPS compliant crypto build. It's what Envoy uses, but not every organization necessarily wants to use boring crypto. I'll just say, and sort of hoping some Red Hat folks join me in this, but I can say, talking to folks inside, inside my organization, there's some hesitation at using things that have boring SSL on it because of some of the language in the boring SSL README that people can't get around no matter how I try to explain it. So all that to say, like, if they're, I would slightly prefer not having, using Ring without boring crypto, just because it causes questions to not have to be asked. Ring is very neutral. FIPS is kind of the current precedent, or it follows current precedent, is that if you want FIPS in Ambient, you have to do everything yourself, pretty much. Or Ring / the default crypto implementation for Ring. So that, again, that's my slight preference, is that FIPS is a vendor or user driven endeavor 100%. But again, recognize that there are some particular organizational things that I'm personally going through.
Ben?
Yeah, I was just going to say what I said in the chat is nothing else in Istio is FIPS compliant. We don't ship FIPS compliant builds for any other part of Istio or Istio Ambient. So yes, zTunnel is, but you can't. It doesn't do you any good that we ship a FIPS compliant zTunnel build if we don't also ship FIPS compliant everything else, or FIPS or certified everything else, and we don't. Vendors do that. So the argument of FIPS compliance means better security is not an argument that anyone will make. I worked in Fed space for a little bit, and it's not an argument anyone made there. So, I don't think that's really a factor.
Well, we shouldn't use, like, Istio is not going to claim to be FIPS compliant.
Correct.
Like, that's not Istio's job. But that doesn't mean that Istio shouldn't make the lives of vendors easier, right?
That's true. And I think it is still easy here because you can still just, with a different make target, build a binary with either. That, as a vendor, that will not impact us in delivering FIPS builds. So I'm fine with that. What the default is kind of doesn't matter to me. I would say my personal preference would be the default would be the thing that builds the most easily on the most platforms in CI. If that is Ring, that's fine. If that's boring, that's fine. I don't really care outside of that.
Well, I would say that the default should be the one that gives us the most testing coverage of the most use cases for users, regardless of whether it's open source or vendored.
That's also
Right.
a viable concern. Yeah, in that case, I would still say it's not FIPS because most people are not going to use that. So, but I don't know.
Oh well, they're not going to try to be FIPS, but using the FIPS build would give you more coverage of the FIPS component.
Yeah, I guess if we're still, as long as we are building both FIPS and non-FIPS in CI, that's kind of a CI question, I guess. If you want to say we want to use the FIPS build in all CI on the zTunnel side, and then also in maybe the integration tests on the Envoy side or the Istio side, that's an argument to be made. But because if we do ship two options, we kind of need to test both equally. I think that may be
right, which is toil, right?
Yes, fair enough.
Right,
Yeah.
that's my worry too. Also, as a project, I mean, we're not going to go through certification of FIPS, right? Which is very time consuming. And I think there's a cost associated with that, right? So we're not going to be able to take the effort, pay the cost, and I suspect we may have to do it on every single release. So that also has to be taken into consideration.
Okay. Sanjeev, go ahead.
Yeah, just repeating what Louis said, that yeah, of course we're not certifying the upstream build, but wouldn't we want to prefer the default builds to be such that it enables the vendors to faster get to FIPS certification, so that we've sort of had that be the default and exercise that the most? Or at least one of two default builds, even if that's not the default shipping build.
But we also don't want to add the cost of complex of a CI and the build.
No. I think those two things are compatible then, right? What Sanjeev is saying is Istio should pick something, and it should consistently use it. in its tests, right? It shouldn't do 3 different builds. It should do 1. Or it should test with 1. Maybe we can have some lightweight testing for the other ones. That build, the primary one, should make it life easier for vendors who want to do FIPS certification, right? Because there's no reason not to help them. If a vendor wants to use a different build because of reasons like the one Keith mentioned, or maybe internal things that a various vendor that causes them to prefer a library that's not the one used by Istio, they're welcome to do that. They'll have to carry the testing burden for making a different choice.
Yeah, I understand that, but I believe Ben also mentioned right now we're not making vendor harder in any way, right? By default, the Istio build has not supporting FIPS, and we still don't support FIPS for Envoy, even if we use boring crypto for Rust. That's
Well,
just
that's
only for Ztano, right?
harder in the sense that, right, more Istio users use the component, even if they don't care about FIPS, and will report bugs if there are problems with it.
Right, that's the worry of shipping FIPS build by default.
No,
We're-
the opposite, Lynn. Right, if we ship a FIPS build by default, even though the other components aren't using FIPS and Istio doesn't claim to be FIPS, if a user finds a bug in that component, it may affect FIPS. And that would
No
be of
way.
assistance to vendors.
I never saw any other open source project in my life at least, shipping FIPS. I don't understand why
No.
to overcomplicate.
Lots of them ship FIPS, but they don't claim to be FIPS compliant.
But who is going to take all this maintenance? That's what I don't understand.
So
Ooh.
I think
What projects are shipping the FIPS? I haven't actually seen that either. I mean, if you're using Go, you just use Go. You don't use the boring Go
Exactly.
fork.
I guess the point was, yeah, let the default not be FIPS, but if we can include some additional testing of a FIPS build in CI/CD, even if that is not the default build, that may help vendors get to FIPS certification faster. And so the upstream is sort of encouraging, doing what it can, doing its part to help the vendors get to FIPS certification faster, even though the default build can still stay non-FIPS.
I don't understand why we should want to do that. I think everybody also in the chat think that this isn't something that will be very hard in the open source to do.
What are people concerned about? Is it, like, nobody's suggesting that Istio takes on certification.
But
Right.
you're
Well, the
asking Sam to
concern-
take some more work to do. That's something that why? Like, why would we want to do that?
Well, we
The
just
concern is the burden. Who's going to pay for that?
Yeah, who is
burden
going to
and
pay for
longer
it?
term
Who's going to
maintenance?
take care of it?
And
There's
why are we
well,
not?
That's
ahead.
a question that we're asking here. We already have boring SSL support in zTunnel. That's a library that is already being supported by other people. We are not supporting it. We've simply adopted it. The question is, should we do the work to pull that out and adopt something else that is not FIPS compliant?
We are not pulling it out. It's still there and will be built. We are just defaulting to a different build, right?
Okay. Thanks for clarifying, Ben.
Yeah, that's a very helpful clarification. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah,
So
and to be clear,
Sanjeev,
like-
if you want to build it, you can build it easily too.
No,
So
but
sorry, John.
in the CI/CD testing, do we have options for testing with different libraries and different, like one with boring SSL and one with, whichever else? Like
In
as long as if it is in the repo as a supported option, even if it is not the default, we are doing some level of testing for it, right?
Yeah, we build it. We make sure it builds, but we don't actually run the tests. We could run the tests though. I mean, that's one PR away from running tests on it. So.
But we also need to measure, how much that would slow down people submitting PR, right? What cost are they paying for that running the actual test?
Yeah, again, it doesn't have to be run on every CI/CD. I mean, I don't know how the test suites are organized, but it could be something that is at least run by in a pre-release CI/CD. When you're testing your release candidate, even if it is not tested on every commit. Basically, the basic point is that can the upstream project do something to make it easier and faster for vendors to get to FIPS certification?
I mean, it's already kind of done, right? You just build it with the FIPS flag, you test it, and then you have to go do the work to actually get that certified, right? There's not much more we can do. Like we can run some tests as well. That's fine. You're gonna have to do it anyways on your vendor build.
I don't think it's running in us running the test. As a vendor, you have to run the tests anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Like right now, we have boring, which is something that I think would probably be appreciated by at least a few vendors in the space. But I don't think we necessarily need to stop there. I'd be perfectly fine with someone adding an OpenSSL provider, for example. It's pretty incremental cost to maintain multiple providers as long as we're not actually shipping official builds for them, right? That lowers the bar substantially for the vendors already. I think Wei was up next, and then Ian.
Yeah, I just want to say, absolutely, OSS Ambient shouldn't, be doing the certification. FIPS certification is up to the vendors, right? But since, like John mentioned, there is already a flag, dash FIPS to make sure that the library used in build is FIPS compliant. So vendors can simply enable that flag, create the build, and submit the build for a lab to certify their build. But it's still, OSS Ambient shouldn't pay for that certification and shouldn't get even involved in that. But we are supportive of, FIPS make it easier for vendors to do the FIPS certification. So my original worry is we use a library that is not FIPS compliant, and the vendor has to replace that library. And when replace that library, maybe the code need to be changed because the APIs in a library may not be exactly the same. But it doesn't seem to be true. John mentioned there is a flag, to make sure the build is FIPS compliant.
Again, I'm sorry if I'm asking this as a repeat question. How much do we test Istio builds with this flag set to options other than the default? Do we do any testing at all, or is it the flag is there but
currently we just make sure it compiles?
Yeah, I think you're up next.
Sure. So I don't know if it would be valuable, but like, does everyone sort of understand the difference between Russell's and Ring as the backend provider for Russell's and Russell's with boring, and what change already went in? Because it seems like we're maybe a little bit confused on how all of this is actually going to work. And I don't know, John, if you want to, I don't know, if we want to explain a little bit better how.
Yeah, I can give some context. So in TLS, there's kind of two parts. There's the actual crypto operations, which is like all the low-level math stuff that I have no idea how it works, and it's all this crazy cryptography stuff that people say don't roll your own crypto for a reason. There's a variety of implementations here. There's OpenSSL has one. Boring SSL is forked from OpenSSL, has their own. Ring is forked from Boring SSL, which is forked from OpenSSL, has their own. There's plenty of others. There's like all the really low-level stuff like AES, GCM, Cha-Cha Poly, all that kind of stuff, hashing, digest, whatever. That's the thing that needs FIPS certification. Those are the crypto modules that they send off and get approved. Then on top of that is the entire TLS stack. That's like the TLS handshake, the record protocol, ALPN, SNI, all that sort of stuff. That part is not part of the FIPS certification. So many TLS libraries allow plugging in the crypto module. So you can use the FIPS certified one or not, or a different one, and then apply the TLS stack on top. In the way that we used to do things, we used a library called Boring from Cloudflare. That was both the Boring SSL TLS stack and the Boring crypto module. Which again, both of these are derived from OpenSSL, which also has TLS and the crypto as kind of one package, even though they're separate. So the change that we made is we're using Rust TLS now. Rust TLS has a pluggable crypto backend. So all of the crypto stuff or the TLS stuff, which is, I don't know how much of the code it is. I don't know, it could be 50, could be 80%. It's a decent amount of the code. Is in Rust TLS, which is obviously pure Rust library used by everyone in the Rust ecosystem, basically. The only real downside to it was that people, for compliance reasons, generally want their own crypto modules. So in the recent Rust TLS releases, they added pluggable crypto modules, and that's what we're using. So the debate here is which module we use by default.
I guess when you put it that way, John, it really doesn't make a huge difference. I'm not sure I see the value in moving away, but honestly, it seems like probably the operation to move away and then move back would take less time than this discussion has.
Yeah, I do agree. Like it actually is not that big of a deal. I'm glad everyone has a lot of opinions and thoughts on it, but to me, I'm slightly pro Ring. But if someone said we should do Boring, I won't lose any sleep over it. The one thing I did do, which we could go back and revisit, but in the Ring configuration, I set it up so that we only use the ciphers and TLS versions and whatnot that are that Boring would use, so that if someone was to swap out the module, we're not going to have like issues of mismatch between a FIPS build and a not FIPS build. I mean, they do negotiate, so as long as there's some overlap, it would be fine anyways. But I figured that was a bit more safe, just in case something weird were to happen. So that could also be revisited if there is desire.
So I think this conversation is super useful for a lot of people to understand what's going on, and so it's not necessarily a waste of time. But whatever we have right now, let's keep it. And if someone wants to change it, they just need to show that replacement or whatever PR improve performance or improve some criteria, and we can change it. I don't think my main concern is to not be stuck on a solution, but have some objective criteria to make changes as necessary based on whatever we choose. I mean, I don't know, speed or number of CVEs or popularities, that's all fine, but it should not be, it should be pragmatic, basically.
Yeah, agreed. I think we should move on from this topic. Good education for everybody.
There is one
Louis.
other wrinkle people should be aware of, and it has nothing to do with which crypto provider implementation, but does have a lot to do with TLS implementations. FIPS is not compatible with TLS 1.3. Right, so you cannot use regardless of what you do, you cannot use TLS 1.3 to implement FIPS. Now, because TLS is a different or an evolution of the TLS protocol, there are features in it that are different. A great example of this is ECH and SNI. Right, in TLS 1.3, you have encrypted client headers, which means that the SNI header is not passed in plain text. Any solution that would depend on routing based on SNI, like the Istio East-West gateway, could not use TLS 1.3 to do that without man-in-the-middling TLS.
Is it encrypting the SNI optional?
It is. No, it is not. You can use TLS 1.2 with a TLS 1.3 implementation, but in TLS 1.3, ECH, I think, is now required.
I think I looked at the spec, and it allows you to, the client chooses if it wants to encrypt or not. It can still use a plain text, or it can use the ETH. The client choice.
That means, right, but it's tied to choosing the TLS implementation, the TLS protocol version custom.
No. I think even in PL, it's an extension in the client login, so you can pass it, I mean, you have a choice even with TLS 1.3. You have a choice. Maybe I misunderstood the standard, but I'm pretty sure that's what it said.
Okay,
I
we
agree
should
with
definitely nail
Austin,
that down.
so we should check. But
Yeah, because that one is critically important, regardless of what crypto provider is used. That has such a wide-ranging impact. We can take that one offline, but just so people understand, there are some quirks that start to play up because of that, right? Because TLS 1.3 mandates the use of what chat poly as an allowed cipher, because TLS 1.3 says that they must be supported by an implementation, and you can't use that with FIPS. It's forbidden.
And
I think most of the FIPS people, though, have decided, because FIPS now also requires that you use 1.3. So there's two competing standards, and I think most people are deciding to remove cha-cha instead of, yeah.
Yeah, they have to turn it off, which violates 1.3 spec. And yeah, just implementations tolerate it differently, probably.
And Kuat already PR'd the compliance profile stuff into the main Istio, right? Where you can actually say, I want to be compliant with FIPS and I'm turning off 1.3. So like if we wanted to test that doesn't break features, like that's probably where we would test that, right?
Yeah, that's even more confusing because
oh god,
the mandate is that as of January, you must support 1.3, but the actual crypto modules that support 1.3 aren't certified yet. So it's like basically impossible to comply with all. There's like 3 conflicting mandates. But by May is when it's supposed to be approved, and then we can use 1.3 without cha-cha poly and make everyone happy except for the people that said you can't disable cha-cha poly. I think it's slower than the other ones anyways, because there's less hardware offloading. So
yeah, except for ARM, when they have no AES built into the ARM chip.
Yeah, I saw the solo post about Z-Tunnel on the Raspberry Pi, so maybe it will be hindered there.
I think they have AES on those chips, but not on every low end. Yeah. Not on every low end ARM chip. It doesn't have it.
Not on my light bulb.
Probably not. No. Everybody, welcome to the FIPS TLS 1.3 rabbit hole.
Yay. Okay, so where do we go from here? It seems like there was I don't think anyone's super strongly opinionated unless you haven't spoke strongly. It seems like there's a slight preference for Ring, aside from Louis, whose opinion I weight quite heavily on the boring side.
Personally, I think it's kind of like Ben said, never promised FIPS, and I think Ring just has better DevX. So I think it's just worth keeping it as a default. I don't really see the point of, as soon as you have a waypoint, you're not going to be FIPS compliant. So,
yeah,
I don't think it's really something we need to do.
Is it just, right, more build coverage versus more testing coverage for what a lot of people are likely to use, right? That's really the pro and con.
Right, but I'm not sure that's something the project needs to solve per se, right? Because
seriously, never heard so much communication about FIPS in an open source community in my life.
Right. I mean, currently to build FIPS, it requires some binary blobs that are annoying, especially if you're not on Intel. It's not a huge deal, but given that we don't support FIPS anyway in other parts, why make our life harder? Is my point basically.
Like I would certainly accept the argument, like using Ring allows us to build for more like environments that developers use on a regular basis. That's probably good enough argument.
I think it's just we don't have to vendor binaries for Ring, and we do for boring. I think that's the main difference. Correct me if I'm wrong, John.
Does this make the average MacBook Lackey's user life easier?
We can already build FIPS. We have vendored ARM64 binaries that we built ourselves.
I know.
To make that happen.
They're Linux ones, though. Is it easier that now you can build it on Mac, even though you can't build the rest of? Well, you can build it, but you can't run it. So
yeah, we have to rebuild them every time. Like there's an update too ourselves. That like we own that already with the boring. So
yeah, so we took on the one-time burden of pre-building them with the ancient compiler stack that you have to get for FIPS compliance.
Okay, so that does sound like it would be easier, right? Because at least the maintenance of that long term would get simpler. That fair? Like, I'm totally amenable to that argument, right? It's like, just make people's lives easier building Istio.
Well, and we could just have like the default, if you're building on a laptop, be it uses Ring, but we still use boring in CI for whatever reason. Not, I don't
What
think
reason? That's the thing.
yeah. I mean, we may have no reason to do it. But.
I just don't see the point, basically.
Okay, I think we should move on. If anybody feels strongly, submit a PR and change back with reasons and performance numbers.
No one wants to
then-
throw out the idea
this-
that maybe we just don't build any builds at all. So
Okay.
that's not popular. All right, sorry, go ahead, Louis.
Well, I mean, the current default is boring, right? That's what we're using. It's what we've been using for the last 18 months. Changing it is a change, right? We have to decide to change.
I think John already changed it, if I've understood correctly.
Yeah, but it was kind of a implicit shadow, not well discussed change. But yes, technically the code on the master branch does use Ring. So. But changing it again is literally a one-line config flag flip, so it's not hard to change.
Yeah, so if anybody feels strongly, submit a PR this reason, and then we can have another discussion.
Okay, sounds like we will stick to Ring for the time being, and we can move on. Next topic, if someone has something else we need to discuss, this is not super important, but I thought it might be interesting. Pingora is this new proxy. It's not new, actually. Cloudflare has been blogging about it for over a year, I think, but they just open sourced it. It is intriguing because it's doing some similar things that we're doing. And I haven't looked much at it because it just open sourced a couple hours ago, but probably some interesting things to take away from it. They had some discussion in some of their blogs about some stuff around more than just HTTP, like packet to TCP to HTTP to back down to packets and whatnot. I don't know that that's actually in the stuff that they open sourced. It might be in a separate layer below or above it or something. But some of that stuff I was interested in case we want to do more L3 stuff for UDP or tunneling IP or something. But worth a look.
Yeah.
Have they published any benchmarks, John?
They have
had a number of
like
blogs.
benchmarks in the repo of various things. I don't know if they have like a full stack one.
But I think they had some blogs when they moved from Nginx or something to Pingora internally.
Yeah, they have some that look like you can run. So maybe I'll try it out and see.
So one of the other interesting announcements at the same time as Pangora was that the Proximo Memory Safe Foundation, whatever they are, the working group, is looking to create a memory safe proxy using that framework. They say work, and I think it's Shopify, ChainGuard, Cloudflare, and some others. That work is planning to start Q4 2024. I find that really interesting. There's been some other relevant political news about this where the executive branch, Office of the President, came out with a memo encouraging use of memory safe languages for critical applications. So, the Istio project obviously utilizes Envoy for most of its for a lot of its stuff, and Envoy is notably not written in a memory safe language. So not saying at all that there's a need or even a desire to make a wholesale switch, but I do think that some of the rumblings that we're seeing with the announcement from Cloudflare, the memo, the presidential memo, make it intriguing or just cause me again to think about the possibility of pieces or some parts of Envoy written in Rust, written in something memory safe. And I don't know, that's just some musings, but I do find a lot of this interesting and be curious to see what this full proxy implementation looks like that they're planning to build.
Yeah, it is announcing a plan to build, right, Keith? It is not that they have built.
Correct. Yes, that's why I said look forward to seeing what what they come out with, because there's a lot to investigate there.
Yeah. Just for those playing, two of the contributors are obvious. One might look at it and wonder why ChainGuard is involved. That is because Dan Laurent was involved in sponsoring the memory safe languages effort inside Linux, and for Linux kernel modules aligned with the memory safety initiative.
So can I think about this as another potential Rust-based proxy, like our ztunnel, and we're not sure if it can be controlled by XDS?
I don't know if Fingora is an alternative to ztunnel or Envoy as a gateway, because it seems to be more oriented as a gateway Nginx replacement, not L4.
Okay, so it can do potential layer 7 functions as well on the gateway layer.
Seems to be targeted to L7. That's why it's interested.
Right, and it doesn't seem like there's a full proxy implementation available, if I understand. But Pingora is a framework for building proxies.
Yeah, it's more of a framework for building proxies. It's not like a off-the-shelf thing like Nginx, but I think the River thing that is with ChainGuard and whatever the other folks were that we mentioned is kind of the productized version of it. I think they have this. It seems like it's mostly focused on being an L7 proxy here. They have another thing that I guess wasn't open source. That was a lot of the non-HTTP stuff. I think they called Oxy. That was I was interested in at least stealing some ideas from, because they had some interesting things in their blog post. But I don't know if that's coming later or never, and they're keeping it themselves or whatnot. But I don't think we would use build ztunnel on top of this or anything. There might be some useful libraries because they have it split out from the core and various libraries. Like they have a load balancing library, a connection pooling library, etc. I don't even know that there's value in doing that. It was more that there is now another major proxy in the space in the same language we're doing using similar libraries. So interesting to take a look at.
Just on the ztunnel front, does Pingora use the same HTTP2 library and libraries, or use the Cloudflare ones?
They have, there's the core H2 library in Rust, and then there's Hyper on top of it. They don't use Hyper, and I believe in the original blog post, they said the reason they didn't was because they want to accept non-conformant HTTP, which maybe makes sense for Cloudflare, maybe does or doesn't make sense for general purpose proxies and ztunnel, certainly not ztunnel for what we're doing. So that was interesting to me. I get why they need to do it, but may or may not be a great idea. So,
all right, something to keep an eye on. Yeah, I mean that would have to handle things like push promises and other more esoteric things in the HTTP2 spec.
Yeah, push promises in particular and reverse channels are particularly bad in the spec, and there are good reasons for it. I mean, gRPC is also kind of using its own stack because HTTP2 is kind of weird.
Yeah, it doesn't need that stuff. Okay. And then does it have quick support? And which quick runtime is it using?
Oh yes, HTTP, of course.
It's quick is on the roadmap for the framework. From what I read, it's planned but not yet implemented in Pingora.
It's what they have in production, or maybe it's not open source. I haven't checked.
Yeah, I
But
think
it's
they
big
must have
one.
a lot of stuff that's not in the open source. I assume that if when they do add it, it would be based on the Cloudflare quiche library, but maybe they'll make it pluggable or something. It'll be interesting to see, since they're partnering with not Cloudflare people, how much they make things Cloudflare ecosystem only. I mean, they did at OpenSSL, which is a sign that maybe they'll be more amenable to other things, but we'll see. Like potentially Rust TLS, Hyper, whatever the thing is going to be for H3. I guess it's also Hyper, are things that would be interesting to see if they have a future there.
Yeah, we should definitely track it. I mean, obviously the Cloudflare guys do some pretty good work in this space, so should take it seriously.
Yeah, but it's concerning. It's in their repository, right? I mean, don't forget what just happened with Nginx.
I think what just happened with Nginx might be why the reason this got announced.
Actually, but the announcement was actually in 2022, right? When they first
Not the open source announcement. They had like an internal announcement.
Okay, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, so when they first published the blog, why they built this thing, that was 2022. So the open source is recently, just a few hours ago.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, thanks, Keith and John, for the industry update, I suppose. Do we have any other topics?
Yeah, I didn't test it thoroughly, but it's way better than faster than Envoy, it appears. So I'll make sure I didn't do something wrong, but it looks about 5 times faster. So
wow.
that almost makes me think I'm using the wrong build or something. So I'll do more research. Don't read into that too much. But yeah,
I'm pretty sure
John,
you're not doing anything wrong.
You put numbers out there, John. We're expecting a now expecting a KubeCon talk on on the numbers ASAP.
Time to ship 2 waypoint implementations.
The 5x is out there.
Actually, hold up. I realize now the Pingora one was actually hitting the backend directly. So ignore that. It's not that bad.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that would be shocking. 30% I could get behind. 5x. No.
Wait, actually, I don't know. Or maybe I'm going through both when I go through Envoy. Anyhow, I'll look into it.
All right. Okay. No other topics then? We wrap up.
Oh, I want to ask about telemetry. Did we have consensus on that for the upcoming beta announcements?
I'm going to be taking that up today. I think I finished up with the doc with John yesterday, so now I'm going to follow up with Lei and Justin.
Okay, cool. I guess it's in good hand when it's in your hand.
Yeah. We are me, John, Quad, Costin, and Justin, we are also discussing that. Yeah. So it's not ignored, basically we are saying. Yeah, we are, discussing it.
Very good. Thanks.
All right, I guess that's it then. John, feel free to share whatever you find on performance numbers in the Slack.
Yep, I'll get real ones. I realized when I was testing it was there. They're a very small abstraction over Tokyo, so it wasn't actually going through the proxy at all.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, thanks so much, John. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Cheers.